Hi, everyone. Welcome. We'll give folks just a couple moments to filter in. Thank you so much for being here with us this morning, or I feel it's probably morning for most of us still. Welcome, welcome. Okay, I'm going to kick things off here. Thank you all so much for joining us for today's webinar, Setting New Employees Up for Success. My name is Katie Alexander. I am ZingTrain's community builder, and I am going to be your host today. I'm thrilled to be here alongside ZingTrain trainer Elnian Gilbert, who I have been alongside before in webinars. It's always a real treat. We also have Mara Ferguson, our keynote liaison. She is behind the scenes to monitor chat and your questions with me throughout the time together. We are all coming to you live from ZingTrain in Ann Arbor, Michigan. We would love to hear where you're tuning in from. So please feel free to drop your location in the chat by clicking on that little chat button at the bottom of your screen. And if you catch wind of any neighbors, say, hey, we're going to dive into the good stuff very, very soon. But before we do that, I have 3 helpful tips to help make the most of our time together. First, as far as the format for today's webinar, we will be presenting here for a bit, Elnian, and then we're going to leave some time at the end for Q&A. As you have questions throughout the time, please put them into the Q&A section. We're going to be collecting them there. And then that is also a button at the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then we'll have some time to answer those at the end. We will do our very best to get to as many as possible. But should we not be able to answer your question, look for resources in our follow-up email that you will receive by the end of tomorrow. Second thing is there is closed captioning available during today's presentation. If you'd like to turn that on, Mara is going to drop details into the chat. And the closed captioning button, again, is a button on the bottom of your Zoom screen. And then the last item of business is that we are recording this conversation, and we'll be sending out the recording and slides by the end of tomorrow in that follow-up email. And the recording will also live on our website, zingtrain.com, alongside a lot of other free resources, including past webinars. So that's all from me. I'll see you again for the Q&A, and I'll turn it over to Elnian to get us started.
All right, thank you, Katie. As she said, my name is Elnian. I'm one of the trainers here at ZingTrain. I've been a part of the Zingerman's organization for almost 17 years. And I think Zingerman's training is one of the things that truly makes this organization unique. It's something that I've never seen before or since. I am going to share some information here with you. So we asked you in the registration to share your answers to a couple of different questions with us, starting with, are you responsible for creating training plans for new hires? That is, unsurprisingly, there were a lot of yeses in the answer to that. I think it makes sense. This is a webinar that, it's about setting new employees up for success. And for those of you who said no, I believe that there's plenty of tools that will still apply no matter what your role is. We also asked you to tell us what gets in the way of onboarding new employees. Well, you all had a lot to say. This is something that almost everyone answered this question. And I've definitely heard a lot of these reasons and experienced them as well. Time was really the first and foremost response. Taking the time for training, time to develop training, time to prepare, time away from other work, right? Or kind of like the competing priorities, time to train trainers. And some of those reasons also show up in the other reasons as well. Like even the next one down, the knowledge exists in too few minds, which means that there's a bottleneck in training when those folks with the knowledge aren't available or dare to try to take some time off. And that also leads to another reason, is that there isn't enough documentation in how things are done or consistency in how they're supposed to be done. So you can see these themes that I pulled from the feedback, and they very much echo what was going on at Zingerman's that led to the creation of our bottom lane training approach. In the early 1990s, Maggie Bayless, who was a longtime friend of Ari Weinswag and Paul Saginaw, who's one of the founding partners, who are the two founding partners of Zingerman, starting with Zingerman's Deli. She worked with Ari and Paul on documenting what was going well at the deli and developing training materials before going on to start ZingTrain in 1994. And when she was working with Ari and Paul, she started by doing a training needs analysis, really in depth. And what she uncovered are things that are very much in alignment with what we heard from you, starting with the fact that the knowledge, all of the information that employees needed to learn was in their managers' minds, which caused those bottlenecks in the training. And it led to a lot of frustration on the part of both trainees, because they weren't getting access to the information that they needed, and the managers as well. And consequently, managers felt like training was a burden, right? And that they didn't really have time to do it as well as they wanted to, or time to do it at all, along with their other work. She also found that a lot of the training materials were out of date, or they weren't even finished. They were collecting dust on the shelves, and they weren't in regular usage. Another thing that she uncovered was that there wasn't really a lot of agreement on what new hires needed to know in order to do their job effectively, or what to prioritize, right? How to prioritize the information that they were delivering to the trainees. Different managers had different things that they wanted to prioritize, or like, oh, this person is new, they should learn this first, not in agreement on what those things were at all. And managers really wanted to do a good job training their new employees and bringing them up to speed, but they either didn't know how, or they didn't have confidence in their own abilities to deliver the training. And there wasn't really any existing structure in place to help them be able to do that. So especially as Zingerman's was beginning to grow, right? And before we had more than the couple of businesses we had at the time, Maggie really identified the need to establish some training structure and develop tools to help managers and others train more effectively. That being said, not all of the challenges were simply with training. So according to Peter Drucker, who's a famous business book writer, only 5% of the problems that we encounter at work are unique problems, which of course, unique problems deserve unique solutions. And what he found was the 95% of problems, which are recurring, we kept trying to apply unique solutions to those recurring problems. And when we do that, we end up wasting a lot of time trying to reinvent the wheel. So he found that recurring problems usually fell into one of three categories: training problems, systems problems, and management problems. And often we're tempted to assume that one or the other is the right solution for every single kind of problem, depending on your perspective, when in fact, there are times that we can make things worse by trying to apply the wrong solution to a problem. So let's talk through what the different types of problems are, starting with our systems problem. So we define a systems problem as when there is no effective, agreed upon, and documented process that, when followed, delivers consistent results, right? So this looks like a lack of consistency. Different people are doing things differently. And what a new employee learns is different based on who they're doing the training with on any given day. It's really, really frustrating for a new employee to learn something, right? One day, be proficient at it, show up the next day, and then be told that they're doing it wrong because they're using someone else's system. And it's ultimately really frustrating for the customers. They're the ones who end up feeling the brunt of this a lot of the time, because they don't know what to expect from time to time. Right? If I come in and like Susan is working, it's going to be really different than if I show up and Felipe is working. That we don't want our customers to experience that, but this is something that naturally just tends to exist when we don't have good systems. I also want to highlight here that it's not just having a system. It needs to be effective. It also needs to be agreed upon by all of the managers and documented. Then we can use that documentation for training, and there's no guessing what people are supposed to do. I mean, and to be clear, it's not always the best or the fastest way to do something, but if we can all agree that if we do it this way, we will get consistent results, then that's what we're looking for in terms of systems, right? Being really clear with people as well on how important it is for them to follow the system in order to get the results that we want. I think that just really sets a new hire and a trainee up for success. But the systems have to exist in order for that to happen. The next type of problem, the training problem, is when there is an effective documented system in place, but employees don't know what it is or how to use it, right? So what this looks like is the managers get together, they create a system. It's beautiful. They craft it. It's lovely. They print it out, they put it in a binder, and then they put the binder on the shelf. Well, how are trainees supposed to magically know what's in that binder, right? Or are they supposed to seek it out and just keep checking the binder to see if anything gets added? If it just sits on the binder and collects dust, the staff will continue to do whatever is easiest for them or whatever they did at their last job, right? We need to actually teach people what the system is and how they're expected to use it going forward. The third and final type is a management problem. And this is where we have the effective documented system. Employees know how to use it, but the system is not being followed and no one is being held accountable. What we often find is that when we have problems with people not doing things correctly, often we tend to default to like it was a training problem or they weren't trained properly. But it's not the answer to every problem. Particularly for newer managers, we have found that it can be a lot easier to act as though things are a training or a systems problem because performance management and holding people accountable can be a lot harder, especially if you've come up through the organization, you were a peer and now you're acting as someone's manager, right? Then it does become easier just to say, oh, well, maybe it's a systems problem, maybe it's a training problem. But if the system exists, it's documented, it works, it's agreed upon, people know what it is and they've demonstrated their competence. They have shown us that they're able to use the system and now they're not doing it. That really is a management problem. Something's getting in the way of them doing their job. I mean, in reality, these problems can coexist, right? I have found it to be helpful to be able to take a step back and let's try to do a diagnostic. Let's look at what's really going on and then start with the biggest problem first and then move on to the next. And they often go in this order though, right? If we don't have an agreed upon and documented system, it's hard to train anyone to it, let alone impossible to hold them accountable. If we have a system, but no one's being taught what it is, then we can start with creating training to teach the system. And if the system exists and is effective, we are training people, they're demonstrating that they know and are able to do what we're asking them to do, and then they're not doing it, then something else is getting in the way of that person being able to do the job. And now it's a performance issue where it's up to the manager or supervisor to provide feedback and coaching that's going to help the employee follow the system. At Zingerman's, you know, if you remember back talking about what was going on, like the first problem was in fact a systems problem, right? There wasn't effective agreed upon processes in place, including a process for onboarding and training. So the solution was to start working on the systems, getting the things agreed upon and documented, and then at the same time, beginning the creation of what we now call bottom line training. So bottom line training, as we define it, is training that has a positive impact on one or more of our bottom lines. Right here at Zingerman's, we have 3 bottom lines: great food, great service, and great finance. And we want to keep them in mind as we're focusing on training. And this definition can sometimes seem, people are like, well, it's really obvious. Of course, that's what it is. Okay, but that's not actually obvious to everyone. And this helps make the point that we don't do training for training's sake or because we think training is super fun. I mean, we do, but that's not the reason that we do it. We do it because it's in the best interest of the business and the employee. It helps us think really intentionally about what are the bottom lines being impacted by this training, right? Is it service and finance? Is it just service? Is it service and food quality, right? There are even trainings that impact all 3, like food safety training, that can have a bottom line impact on all 3 of our bottom lines at the same time. And you can see that bottom line training is trademarked. It's not it's not only this definition of what bottom line training is, it's also this encompasses the 2 key components of bottom line training, which I'm going to share next, starting with our training compact. Right? If you've ever attended any training with ZingTrain, you'll be familiar with this. This is the first key element of it. The purpose of the training compact is to really clearly spell out that both parties, both the trainer and the trainee, have an important role to play in effective training. So we review the training compact in the beginning of every single training class, from orientation classes all the way up to manager level training. And we talk about it on every training shift, right? We actively ask people to answer, right? We tell them our side of the training compact. Here are your clear performance expectations. Here are the training resources that have been provided. Here's how we're going to recognize and reward performance. And then we ask the trainee and say, what will you do to take responsibility for the effectiveness of your own training? And there's often a long pause when people are first introduced to this because they think that this is a rhetorical question and they don't really have to answer, but we make it clear this is going to be a back and forth. I want them to answer that that's an expectation. I mean, for many people, they've never had to think about this before, right? Any training or education that they've done has been pretty passive without a lot of active engagement on the part of the trainee, where they kind of show up and it's like, lay it on me, teach. Like, okay, but you have an important role to play in this too. This makes it clear that we expect full participation and engagement from each person, and that we're going to treat them like adults. Only they know what they need to do in order to get the most out of the training. The trainer can't read their mind. And we also don't want the training to be overly prescriptive, right? That gets really boring for everybody involved. Trainers will often coach, right, as people are starting to share some of the things that they can do to live their side of the training compact, or especially if they're not hearing it from trainees, things like, please ask questions. Questions are expected and encouraged. Take care of your physical self. If you need to take a break, if you need to stand up and stretch and move around, take notes. I personally am a really big note taker, right? And so the trainer can add their own personal experiences and say, I know that when I'm taking training, I'm a better participant when my hand is moving and I'm taking notes, because I've also learned that it makes me a better co-participant because my mouth isn't moving when my hand is working, right? I mean, so that's one of those things that this starts to set the tone for the level of engagement that we expect of trainees and trainers. When this was first created, it was manager and trainee, right? We very quickly realized that managers are not, like, trainers are not always the managers are not always trainers. And initially, we thought it might be like 50-50 percentages of responsibility. But pretty quickly, when it's 50-50, it's too easy to put the blame or the responsibility on the shoulders of the other party. So we decided that it needed to be 100% responsibility for the effectiveness of the training, and both the trainer and trainee need to take 100% responsibility, right? As the trainer, I need to document those clear performance expectations, which typically are the objectives, right, in a classroom kind of setting. Training resources, it's the time for the training, it's the space. We usually bring snacks to any Zingerman's training. And then the recognizing and rewarding performance, I might sign off on their training plan to recognize that they've been here and attended the class, or might be verbal praise and recognition. What is really helpful is helping the trainee understand this applies in this training, this applies to training as a whole. Right? They need to do what they need to do in order to get what they need to get out of the training, right? Training is not done for fun. It's done because we want you to know or be able to do something that requires active engagement. And by making this clear, it really helps overcome well, I didn't know, no one ever told me. It's like, okay, but did you ask, right? You need to ask. It's not okay just to say, well, no one ever told me. Right. This is a tool that if you did nothing else after this webinar, other than starting to use the training compact, I feel very confident that it would lead to more effective training. Just take Zingerman's out, right? You could put a period after training. You could put in the name of your own organization. So, and here, we talk about bottom line training. This approach to training, this concept is two important parts. So one of it is the training compact. The other part are these 4 training plan questions. This forms the basis for the structure of any training at Zingerman's. So for every single position or role at Zingerman's, we answer these questions and create what is called a passport or a training plan. So this is a document that sets the employee up for success during their orientation period or their first 90 days at Zingerman's and hopefully beyond. So today I'm going to share a little information about the 4 training plan questions, and then in a companion webinar next month, we'll go into more depth on the passport and how they're used to onboard new employees. So starting with question number 1, what is expected of the trainee and by when? Right. It is critical to effectively document what a trainee needs to know and be able to do in order to perform their job. Right. This should align with the job description, which again, obvious, but is not always the case. And ideally, it will include things like behavioral performance expectations, things like answers the phone using Zingerman service recipes. The passport is not the place to put what the service recipes are or what exactly they're supposed to say. This is more this is what you are expected to know and be able to do. It is elsewhere that they're going to learn that. They'll learn that in a class, right? We'll detail that, how we want them to answer the phone somewhere else, but the consistent behavioral performance expectation is that they answer the phone using the service recipes. This also crucially really helps set the priorities. There is no way a new employee knows what is the most important thing for them to know on day one or even several months in the job. Documenting the priorities for them lets the staff know exactly where we expect them to be at any point in their training journey. And the by when really helps the employee feel successful because they know where they're supposed to be in the training journey and that they can see their own progress, right? I have heard, from the early days, one of the things that Maggie would talk about too is that people felt like they weren't measuring up, right? They would measure their level of product knowledge against people who had been here for decades, right? Well, that's not realistic. And that's not what anyone actually expected of them. But when you don't have this is the level of cheese knowledge I actually expect you to have, like what are our top 5 selling cheeses? What are they called? Where do you find them, right? That's what I want the person to know, not esoteric information on the breed of cow that feeds in the pasture to create this specific, lovely, delightful cheese. That can come later. That's fun anecdotal information. That's not what the priority is. So the by when is really helpful for both the trainer, the manager, laying out the training plan, but also the trainee so that they can see as they're progressing along the way. So training plan question number 2 is, how will the training resources be made available? So this is often where people start with training. Well, we need to train people on the skills. What resources do we need to give them? Well, okay, hold on. This is the second step, right? Training people on the skill, like, okay, I know I need to teach you how to answer the phone. I need to be really clear on what that expectation is first. Then we want to determine what are the training resources. How will this person learn this information? We want to do these kind of in order to set the trainee up to be really successful, not to try to match training to existing resources, which is frankly sometimes easier when the resources don't exist yet. And once we know what the goal of the training is, then we can start to match that up with the different materials and with the different resources. The 3 main training resources we use for orientation are classroom training, right? This is for delivering the same information to multiple people at the same time. This was one of the success stories that someone shared with us. They were opening a new location of a co-op. They were able to do like a whole staff onboarding. So everyone is hearing the same message at the same time. That is really, really helpful. And there are some content areas that benefit from people getting together and learning them in a class, right? We have an orientation class kind of about Zingerman's as a whole and what's important to us. We have a customer service class that we expect everyone to take, right? Because everyone's expected to give great service in our organization. Classroom training is exactly the right place. And there are some things like customer service you're also going to learn on shift, right? Which is one-on-one or one-on-a-few. Typically, it tends to be more skills-based or task-based training. This is 80% of the training that we do here at Zingerman's. We have more classes than I think a lot of similar organizations, but the one-on-one on-shift training is something we do a lot of. The third style is self-study, which is good for things like data, right? If you need to know certain facts that you just need to have memorized, we often think of like menu tests or product knowledge tests are the kind of things that we want people to really like know and internalize the information. We don't necessarily need to go over it in a class, or the self-study can be supplemental to something that people have learned. Right? It can help them reflect on it, internalize it, and then be ready to kind of move that skill forward the next day. So we've talked about what are the clear performance expectations, when do they need to be able to do it by. Then we talked about what the training resources are made available. The third training plan question is, how will we know if the expectations are or are not being met? This is measurement, and it tells us whether the trainee is ready to move on or not. Right? At the end of this training period or this training shift, how will you and the trainee know if they've been successful? So this really depends on what the expectation is. There are some things like if it's facts, right, that we want them to know, it could be a written test. There's usually not a penalty for people failing the test. They can try again. I mean, after failing a certain number of times, like we're going to start having different conversations, but that almost never happens. It could be a performance test to demonstrate competence on a new skill, that you're not only able to do it consistently, correctly, you're also able to do it at the pace that has been set. And I want to stress the whole demonstrate competence, because it is never done as a gotcha. It's almost always the trainee identifying, I feel like I'm ready for this to get signed off on, right? I like this is, I'm ready to go with this. Or it could be something like observation and feedback on something that requires a bit more discretion and isn't so cut and dry, right? Customer service tends to be that kind of thing where it's, you know, like people aren't doing things incorrectly, but if with a couple of tweaks, it might be even better, right? Answering the phone is pretty cut and dry. I mean, also observation and feedback, it's like a, yes, you used the correct script. No, you didn't use the correct script. And there's still room for expression. It's not that scripted. But observation and feedback is, we don't want to just do it based on our perception or our gut feelings. Right. Okay. So now we know whether the trainee is meeting or not meeting our expectations. So then consequently, what are the rewards or consequences for meeting or not meeting those expectations? Often when people hear rewards or consequences, they think raise versus fired. Okay. Well, that's not actually usually the reward or consequence. They are typically much less dramatic. So it can be things like you get to move on versus you have to keep working on this specific skill. When we're talking about kind of like levels of the training, say we have 14-day expectations, like I'm not ready for you to start working on day 21 or day 30 expectations until I know you've nailed the 14-day expectations, right? And most people want to be able to continue to move on. I think one of the other rewards or consequences is independence versus close supervision, right? Like you don't need my oversight in order to continue to do this. I know that you're going to do it correctly. I don't need to keep checking in on you when you do this thing versus I'm not like hover exactly, but I'm going to keep double checking the work that you're doing. People want to get past that. That is a very effective reward or consequence. I mean, in some of our clients, they do have the more dramatic, you know, like if you don't complete your entire training plan in your 90-day orientation period, like you're not going to be a good fit for this organization. And to be clear, we have designed it, we have tested it, we have kicked the tires. Our training is designed that an employee can be finished with it in sooner than 90 days. And for us, when they hit the 90-day period, we don't fire them. But we start shifting the conversation is, what do I as your manager need to do in order to help you be able to complete this training plan? So by answering all 4 of those training plan questions, we've designed a plan that really does set the trainee up for success. I think a lot of our approach is trainee-centered training and trainee-centered design versus manager-centered design or manager-centered instruction. So then why would you want to invest the time in implementing bottom line training? Well, I think there are a lot of benefits for doing this. So first and foremost, it is an approach that is simple and quick to implement. Doesn't mean that it's easy, right? But the idea is that with a relatively low investment of time to start, you can start making your training more effective. Lengthy planning and an over design can kill a training initiative when you feel like it has to be perfect before you roll it out. And it often prevents anything from ever being implemented. The 4 training plan questions can be applied to anything, right? Yes, they work really well for onboarding, creating a 3-month plan. They also can work for a single shift. They can also work for like professional development over the course of this next year, right? What are you expected to know and be able to do? It also helps us target problem areas as they come up and identified, right? We don't have to wait for the whole revision of the training materials. We can start to make little adaptations, right? I talked about how the expectation is that you follow the system. The system can change, that lives elsewhere, but the expectation is what's going to stay the same. So these start to work really well in concert with each other. The other thing is that we want to have the emphasis, and I mentioned this, in the 4 training plan questions, but I want to re-emphasize this. It gives the trainee the information that they need to know or be able to do in order to be successful. Right? This is not always the thing about what the trainers are the most excited about teaching or what the managers think that the trainee needs to know first. This is like, we have agreed upon, this is the amount of information that does not overwhelm people. We're not trying to train them from the higher fire hose, right? Where you just line them up and then like dump all this information on them. That was something else that came up in the survey too, was the success stories talking about how they actually sat down and thought about what I wanted to tell the trainee and by when. And I mean, in also the, like, when it doesn't go well, what happens? Like, the employee can only retain so much information on any given day. We want to narrow that down, and every single thing that we're doing, we want to think about setting the employee up for success. We want them to stay here. We want them to feel successful. We want them to be able to do their job first and foremost, right? We also want to develop tools that reduce, not increase, leadership burden. Right? Our managers have a lot on their plates. So a good training program makes their lives easier, not more complicated, right? While the training manager might be responsible for helping to design the training plan, they are not the only one doing the training. This gets that bottleneck out of their head. It's documented. A peer can do the training, or we have certified trainers, right? People who have a more natural aptitude for training or want to be able to train their peers to do a really good job. That is all in the interest of reducing the leadership's burden. And the other thing, we talked about the name of this bottom line training. We want to have a positive impact, one or more of our bottom lines, right? If our training is not having a positive bottom line impact, it is having a negative impact. It's not a good use of organizational time or resources, right? And if that's the case, then we need to improve on what we're doing, or we need to change what we're training on. We need to make tweaks to it. Zingerman's does not exist just to train people. I mean, ZingTrain exists for that, but Zingerman's as an entire organization, that's not the purpose of the work that we're doing. So I also thought it would be helpful to talk a little bit about bottom line training in action, right? What are some of the real benefits for hiring managers to start, right? For one, for a hiring manager, it means you're not reinventing the wheel every single time you hire someone, right? You get consistency when you hire for the same position. You might start with the same passport or training plan. You might need to make some minor tweaks or updates, or you could choose to do it. We often do this biannually, right? So twice a year, we're really reviewing it. And what this also means is that you get a higher level of consistency in people doing the job, because they've had the same expectations, right? Same performance expectations. They had the same training. They're in alignment. We don't have this kind of like old guard, new guard kind of thing. And I do want to say too, if you start developing training plans, if that's something that you're interested in, have your existing staff kick the tires, test it out, right? For one, you're going to get their buy-in on this, and you will sometimes uncover things where there isn't as much agreed upon, like the system is out of date, or needs to get updated, or we're not actually in agreement that this is the system that we want everyone to use. The other thing that I think is important is that you're getting the planning and organization done before you actually hire someone, right? I mean, we're not often in our business, and I imagine in many of your businesses too, you're hiring for the same position over and over and over and over again. We don't need to keep, so like the planning and organization, when I say that it happens before you hire, it's before that person starts, but sometimes it's years ago that we actually did all the labor to develop this effective training plan. If it's working, then you just keep using it. The other thing too is that even if you're developing this for the first time, it's never going to be perfect. Like, trust me, at Zingerman's, our training is not perfect. It has never been perfect. It will never be perfect, right? We're all humans and we do the best we can all the time. But if you are able to get this passport, this training plan in place, then your conversations with the trainee are about them and the training that you're going to deliver on. It's not like your stress and running around and trying to assemble materials and having that trainee like cooling their heels, right? This respects their time and energy, that you're clearly prepared and ready for them to start. And again, it's not saying that we do this 100% of the time. We do our best. The benefits for the new hire, right? Well, first and foremost, they actually know what success looks like for them in their new role, right? I can't stress enough what a game changer this is. as well as the trainee is able to drive their own learning and advancement. They're not waiting for the manager to tell them what to do. This is really different. It's not that like, I'm going to show up for work today. I have no idea what I'm going to be learning. I have no idea what I need to be working on. I'm just going to like wait until someone like tells me what I have to do. Well, that's exhausting for managers. And frankly, it's not great for employees or trainees either. This is it's self-driven. The passport, as I mentioned, I mean, a lot of the time it's actually a physical document, and we're going to go into more on this in the companion webinar. The trainee is the one who owns it and holds on to it, right? The manager, the trainer can have a checklist of information that you want to cover, but the expectations are for the trainee, which often means sometimes that if there's a little bit of a lull, they might pull it out, or someone could check in with them and say, hey, what do you need to work on next? Or they can go to their manager and say, hey, it looks like I need to start getting ready to schedule this class because it's in my day 30 expectations. Okay, great. Let's get it on the calendar. I can see when the class is being taught, or, there's an e-learning course that you can do, alternatively. It's them looking ahead so that they're charting their own success. Many employees who work here are self-starters, right? I was this person. I was like, I don't want to wait until I'm told I have to do things or like feel like I'm behind. I want to get out of orientation sooner than 90 days. I want to be feeling like I'm excelling at this. And this gives them the tools and the ability to really do that. So this is really big picture, talking about this approach to training. There is, of course, more nuts and bolts stuff on the training plan and the passport, which I will talk about in a subsequent webinar. But for now, what I want to do is to kind of throw the doors open, the gates open, so to speak, and answer your questions. So what questions do you have about anything that we have shared so far? And I do see from Tara in the chat, why is it called compact and not contract? I believe I was not here for the origination of it, and I can always check with Maggie. I believe that it is compact because contract has kind of just a negative connotation. And the compact was the idea that we're kind of both agreeing to this. This isn't a legally binding thing that anyone has to agree to. We're asking people to do something a little bit different.
Thank you so much, Elnian. This is where I pop back in. We do have a couple other questions, and please, if you have, just continue to bring them in, and we'll just kind of go through as we have a little bit of time here for them. So one question we have is, how might you identify a good candidate to be a peer trainer?
That is a great question, and it's something we talk about in our bottom line training seminar, which is a whole 2-day seminar on this topic. It is way more in depth. I think you need to think about what do you really want that person to be able to do. I think identifying someone who will be an effective trainer, it's someone who's good at explaining and doesn't say things like, well, just do this. Right? Or like, watch what I do. It's like, okay, well, they're going to watch you and they're going to pick up something, but the odds that it's exactly what you want them to learn are not high. I also think that we want to identify trainers who are very competent in whatever the task or skill is and are members of the team in good standing, right? If someone is having disciplinary action, I mean, not everyone is going to know that, but that kind of disqualifies them for being a trainer. We want the essentially more the model employees to be the ones who are training the new employee, because that's who they're going to look up to. So the person who kind of skirts the rules or is like, nah, I know they said to do it this way, but here's what we really want you to do. Not going to be an effective trainer.
Fair enough. Okay, so Jessica asks, can you discuss pay for the trainers and the trainees during this is 90-day process, but just sort of the whole onboarding time?
Yeah. So it depends on the business to some degree. So at our full service restaurant, if it is a server, right, they make a different wage because they're largely compensated in terms of tips. So they definitely have a different training wage because it is essentially slowing them down, and they're not going to take as many tables. They're not going to, it's going to change the level of service that they're providing. So they do have a training wage. Other businesses, I think they do, will sometimes do, maybe 50 cents more an hour, $1 more an hour, training wage, or there will be like a training benefit. So, if you teach this number of hours, or you do this level of, you get certified to be a trainer, you might get like $50 a month, or an additional perk. So, I mean, in the food industry, it's a really nice perk to get a better discount on the food. So that's something that I know that some of our businesses do in terms of compensation for trainers. Trainees are paid their regular wage when they're in training. So we pay people to be trained. Not necessarily self-study. That's a little bit more of a slippery, sticky wicket, right? If we ask someone to take some information home and to think about it overnight, I don't know that we necessarily pay them for that like hour that they spent thinking about it.
Yeah. And good. That also answers Renee's question, which was about if peer trainers make more money than coworkers.
Yeah.
And so
when they're
yes.
training, when they're training, yes. All the time, I don't think so.
Yeah. I will say also, one thing that we do for trainees is that sometimes when they are hired, they have an initial pay, like initial wage during their training period. And then once they complete their 90-day training, their wage goes up. It's like basically a reward for going through that process.
Yeah. And I will say it. So in the next, I don't want to like just keep saying in the next webinar, but we're going to talk a lot more about passports and how they actually work. But yeah, there are pretty distinct, getting out of orientation benefits that we offer for people at Zingerman's. One of them is your employee discount. You don't qualify for that. I mean, and here, the employee discount is not only in your home business, it's in all of the businesses at Zingerman's. So you want to get out of orientation so you can get that discount on the great food. So that's definitely something that is important. Greta, I see your question too. It is the trainee's responsibility to track passport completion, but their manager is checking in with them on it. Like typically it's a weekly thing. I mean, their peers can ask them to look at it, but it is something that the manager is looking at with the trainee regularly, in a perfect world, ideally. So there is not I mean, you could theoretically have like a manager version and a trainee version where the trainee kind of like owns theirs and they're getting things signed off on. And the manager could have like a check, this is done, this is done, this is done. I mean, that does seem a little duplicative, and we want the trainee to be taking responsibility and driving the success of their training. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a question that also came up in the pre-webinar survey is, we have a training program. We want employees to take ownership of it, but it's difficult. So do you have just kind of like, if there's anything else to expound on there, is there any other advice or guidance to give?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I will say that it does happen that we sometimes hire someone and then they are not succeeding. And we try really hard to find like, maybe this is not exactly the right job for you, but like this one would be really great. Right. So we do try to give people ample opportunities, within our businesses or within the wider organization. I will say we often sometimes let people go on a little bit longer than we necessarily should, because we don't want to go through the pain of hiring someone new or the aggravation. And that almost always in those instances when we're finally like, you know what, this is not working, and we like release that person back into the wild, there's kind of a breath of relief because people have been covering for that person. So, I mean, that is a rare situation. I would say that most of the time in our hiring process, which is, I mean, I'm sure we have a webinar on that content too. Like we are working really hard to find people that are going to be qualified for the position, and then want to succeed.
Yeah. Okay. We've got a few questions that sort of dive into the creation of the training passport plan and sort of what happens. There are some situations of what happens like during training. So the first one, Aaron asks, can those 4 training plan questions be answered as a group, like answered with the trainer and trainee together to develop an individualized plan? Or should the trainer be answering and developing that ahead of time?
It's the trainer doing it ahead of time almost all the time. Now, especially for a new employee, like, right, or someone who's learning a new set of skills, they don't have enough information to be able to know what they're supposed to be able to do or know what the training resources are. Now, for me, I've been at Zingerman for a really long time. If we're talking about this in terms of like my professional development or my performance over the course of the year, then that could be something that's done more collaboratively between me and my manager, right? It's the like, what is something that I'm interested in learning more about that like is the business willing to invest the additional resources in me attending a training, which I have done, right? We never think we're done learning about training. But I think especially for onboarding, the trainee just does not have the information that they need. It's the manager, it's the trainer developing this training plan. And then they might get help from existing employees, right? People or other managers who are going to help answer the 4 training plan questions or to vet it, to test it out. But I haven't heard of doing that collaboratively with a trainer and trainee together.
Okay, next question is, you're in training. What happens if your new employee offers up a better way of doing something?
Well, so this is not uncommon. And the challenge with that is it truly better, or is it their perception that it's better? I mean, trainees bring in fresh eyes all the time. It is great. They often have insights into how we're doing things that, like, just because we've always done it this way is not a reason to keep doing it that way. That being said, there are sometimes times that like we're doing it a specific way for a reason, and that may not be clear to the trainee at that point in time. And what we want them to learn is our systems and to come fully up to speed before they start trying to change everything that we're doing. So sometimes a manager will actually just start that conversation, especially when we're hiring someone with a really high level of professional expertise or competence, like a baker, to say, you're going to have great ideas. You're going to see process improvements that we could make. You're going to have suggestions about the recipes. What I'd like to ask you to do is to write them down and tell me as your manager. Maybe don't share them with every single person that you work with, because people will not be receptive to it all the time when it's a brand new employee. So I think that you can listen to what the new trainee says and then just like kind of sit with it for a little bit. Is this actually a better way of doing it, or is it just different? Right? Because then they're more comfortable with doing it the way that they're used to doing it from another business. And it may not actually be the right thing for us, but we have to think through like the steps. And I often think about the downstream impact, right? Like if we skip this step here, it doesn't look like anything to you, but the accountant 4 steps down the line is going to be real unhappy that they didn't get the information in the way that they expected or the way that they needed. Ask me how I know when we make the accountant mad.
That's a very thoughtful way to approach that. Okay. Next question. Adriana asks, is it a bad idea to say that multiple ways of doing, excuse me, let me rephrase. Is it a bad idea to say that there are multiple ways of doing a certain task as long as the end result is the same in training?
No, I think what is really helpful to get clear on that is, and being able to tell the trainee, when is it okay that like, I'm going to teach you this system, which is the consistent way of getting these results. I personally do it a little bit differently. You'll see Joe doing it a little bit differently. You'll see Jose doing it a little bit differently. But as long as the result looks like this, then however you get there is okay. But what we want to be able to teach the person is, if you do it this way consistently every single time, you're going to do it in the right pace and you're going to get the right result. Then they can develop a little bit of personal expression. And also being clear on the times when it is like, it needs to be every single exact step in this process in order to get this result. Please do not ad lib, right? I think both of those, it is a yes, and there are times when putting your own spin on things, doing it a little bit differently is perfectly okay. And there are other times when it's like, no, I really need you to follow every single step in the system exactly as written. So I don't think it's not a bad thing at all. I think just being able to be clear on it and tell the trainee, this is one of those things where, you know, you will likely find a way that's a little bit faster for you to do this, but the only way for you to know that is for you to get in and start doing it.
Yeah. And then in regards to, we talked about the pace of work and demonstrating pace. Josh would love to know, how do the pace of training and expectations differ for part-time employees versus full-time employees, if at all?
So one thing to think about too, I talked about day 14 expectations. That could be 14 shifts, right? So when we say day 14, it's not necessarily a calendar 2 weeks, or, you know, because that's not even 14 days either, right? We can shift that interpretation a little bit so that we're not hamstringing. We do definitely have part-time employees. So their 14-day expectations might get modified. Language might say over the course of your first 10 shifts, right? Presuming that they're going to work that same amount of time. What we want to think about as we're thinking about pacing for part-time employees is there a long lag in there? Are they only working Friday, Saturday, Sunday that are super busy? Like, we need to think about how we're designing training for those people so that they're not like forgetting everything that they need to know on Wednesday through Thursday. I mean, that hasn't typically been a huge issue for us, but yeah, we don't want to penalize people who are working part-time by holding them to full-time expectations. It's a great point.
Yeah. Okay. And then Alexandra, she's curious, you mentioned the bottom line training 2-day seminar. Is that something that we offer virtually, or is that only in person?
So the bottom line training seminar is a 2-day in person here in Ann Arbor. We offer some of the core content in 2 different virtual workshops that are each 2.5 hours. The 4 training plan questions and passport creation we talk about in a workshop called Creating Training Plans That Work. And our 5 steps for effective on-shift training is kind of a version of our Train the Trainer class. So how do you teach people how to be effective on-shift trainers? Those are both 2 big content areas from the 2-day seminar. But it's a different experience. We go into more in depth. You get a chance to do some like live and in-person fun role plays in the 2-day seminar. It's a lot of fun. And the benefit, I mean, of both of those is you're attending it with other trainers who have like this like similar experience, similar challenges, are able to share how they got past a specific challenge. So they're both very interactive. They're kind of different approaches to delivering the same content. Some of which I have shared with you today. A lot of which you might even say.
Yeah. Thank you all so much for being with us today and spending this hour together and asking really great questions and being so interested and invested in your employees. If your question, I think we got to all the questions, but we will still have follow-up resources. We're going to share these slides and this recording with you in the follow-up email. Thank you, Elnian, very much. And thank you, Mara, also for your time, expertise, and working behind the scenes so well. We would love to hear your thoughts about the webinar. Your feedback directly impacts what we do here. So Mara, thank you, has dropped a link. It's a very short survey. We would love for you to let us know your thoughts. Again, I'll be sending out a follow-up email tomorrow, and thank you very much for being here. Have a great rest of your day, and we will hope to see you back next month.
All right. Thanks, everyone.